long as all the flight teams give a go, we'll proceed in for a docking and beat that lightning window. Right now, teams are estimating about 10 minutes until we make contact with that port.
As we heard in the instructions to the crew to continue to monitor, the crew has a burn monitor tool available in their crew displays. They are able to access that basically from the moment that the nose cone is opened all the way through deorbit burn. It basically provides the information, when we say monitor progress, they're able to have that insight into the expected delta Vs, the magnitude of the burn, how long it will last, and of course the countdown timers for Dragon's prep state of the burn, as well as the burn execution itself. And the training that the crew goes through while they are in the training modules here in Hawthorne, California, actually includes audio from previous missions. So as the Dragon is breathing, is living around them as it steers itself to the International Space Station, they are able to come into the situation well prepared, not startled, and it also allows them to basically know what nominal is for each portion of their flight.
This is a great view we're seeing. It's on the right, we have the station cameras looking at Dragon during its approach. Dragon is making its way to waypoint 2, which is a 20-meter mark. We're at about approximately 150 meters and closing. It is a slow and methodical approach. We're also seeing views from inside the cabin. In that center screen, you can see they're tracking the trajectory. The flight computer is also calculating different breakout maneuvers should they need them. But again, we have teams all over monitoring. We have the crew inside Dragon, the crew inside the International Space Station, and flight control teams in Hawthorne and Houston. Everything's looking good for Dragon's approach.
But prior to the crew being able to pass through that waypoint 2, we should hear a call out instructing the crew to secure their visors, basically bring those visors locked or back down into the locked position to basically close the loop of their spacesuit, because at that point in time they will be at about 20 meters from the space station, so that they basically, you can see the visors are now up, so we should be hearing a call and a
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, soft capture ringing extension complete.
SpaceX Dragon copies the speed as well.
If we get views from the station, here we go, looking at Dragon, soft capture ring is that gray structure in the middle. You can sort of see some of the features. That is, it's a soft capture ring because when it makes contact with the station, it actually has a little bit of give, allows for a softer docking, so it's not hard, although the approach is very slow. And then as part of the docking procedure, the soft capture ring starts to retract and really pulls the Dragon in and allows hooks to drive to the international docking adapter, the hooks being on the Dragon side, that allow for a hard mate to the International Space Station. Space Station flight controllers, in the meantime, are working with the station's attitude control configuration, altering between gyros and different thrusters on the station side. There is a very calculated set of procedures that have to do with a docking to minimize those loads on both spacecraft.
pretty cool view here. First time we've really been able to see detail in the solar arrays. Those are the panels there on the side of the Dragon trunk. So that is what basically allows Dragon to help power itself while it is on orbit. and while it's making its way to and from the International Space Station.
Station Houston on the big loop for procedure review.
Houston Station is complete with our review of steps 5 and 6, and we are ready for docking.
Okay, Houston copies all, and at waypoint 2, Dragon will briefly pause.
Houston copies.
That was NASA astronaut Josh Cassada inside the International Space Station. He's been monitoring the approach of Crew-6, confirming from the station side everything looks go from his perspective. Teams will continue to poll and giving goes across the board before actually proceeding. But that's great news. It's looking good from inside the station.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Houston and Hawthorne have pulled go for docking. Confirm visors down and that you are ready for approach 2. How copy?
SpaceX Dragon, our visors are down, and we are ready for docking.
Copy. SpaceX will enable approach shortly. As a reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
It's great news. Across the board, we have goes to proceed past waypoint 2 in for docking. A little bit of refinement on the procedures that have been worked recently. At the 20-meter point, traditionally we have held for a pull before proceeding. This is more of a pause. At the 20-meter mark, there's going to be a reconfiguration, and then the Dragon will proceed in for a slow and incremental approach to make contact with the International Docking Adapter. But you heard across the board, flight control teams in Hawthorne and in Houston, International Space Station teams, and the crew aboard Dragon Endurance, all giving their go, all giving the green light to proceed with docking this evening. We're now inside 60 meters from the International Space Station.
We are just under 3 minutes until we reach that hold point. There on screen, we can see those Draco thrusters continuing to fire.
Inside 40 meters.
I was just about to say that angle of being able to see Dragon there. You can see that soft capture ring a little bit easier, as Gary was saying before, that basically will make contact with the International Space Station and pull Dragon in for the hard capture portion, but that soft capture, as the name indicates, just kind of makes it a little bit smoother of a process.
We are entering into a short handover period from some of the tracking and data relay satellites that are providing views from the space station. Fingers crossed we get video during docking. There is a chance that we will lose them. It's not a constraint to proceed with docking. Lighting is a bigger factor. But some of the incremental drops that you're seeing as part of our coverage is the tracking and data relay satellites that are providing the video that you're seeing right now. Confirmation that Dragon has arrived at waypoint 2. As predicted, it's going to pause and reconfigure for its approach 2. pause will be very, very brief, just a matter of seconds.
We see your docking hooks not open. Warning. Investigating.
Dragon copies.
So you heard that as part of those checks that we need to give the go, even though they pulled go, we're going to continue to check all the systems on board Dragon before actually proceeding.
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is going to hold here.
Station copies.
And there's that confirmation. So again, it was a reconfiguration, that pause at waypoint 2. This is built into the procedures, doing an incremental series of checks. It looks like we were looking at the hooks to make sure those hooks are the ones that are actually going to drive and create what's called a hard capture of the Dragon to the International Space Station. It secures the Dragon firmly to the station to allow for the next series of very important steps of pressurization and equalization. There's a vestibule that separates the Dragon from the International Space Station. They're both pressurized for humans to be able to successfully live aboard, but we need to bring that vestibule up, which is sitting at vacuum, to allow us to open up the hatch and actually enter into the International Space Station. Very important series of steps. So we are going to hold at waypoint 2 and investigate those hooks before proceeding. With the hold, we are regaining video from the tracking and data relay satellites.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop for hook status.
And SpaceX Dragon, go ahead on the big loop.
Hey Steve, as you can see, Dragon is holding here at waypoint 2. This is due to that hook 5 microswitch issue that we had. And ground is going to be investigating commands and next steps, and we'll come back with more words.
SpaceX Dragon copies, we'll be standing by.
So a little bit of back and forth there between Commander Steve Bowen and SpaceX Core David Huang, just indicating that the teams here on the ground are going to investigate and troubleshoot that the hook alarm that they noticed, and that they will come back with more information and instructions just momentarily. I'd like to point out, because we keep hearing from basically a single source from SpaceX Mission Control. It's that core. Obviously, different personnel than it was 24 hours ago, because we utilize shifts. But that core is basically the person that is responsible for communicating all things to the crew from SpaceX Mission Control. It's very similar. There's a view there. That's David Huang now. And it's very similar to NASA's Capcom at JSC. That person's the point person to basically make decisions on distilling all the technical information that they are receiving from the launch teams, if it is launch day, or now the docking teams as we are getting ready to dock, and really distill the critical information, relay it up to the crew, and get their feedback if it is one of those scenarios. So once again, Dragon just holding at waypoint 2, about 20 meters away from the International Space Station. They're well within the keep-out sphere. As we said before, that it's an imaginary sphere around the space station, measuring about 200 meters all around. And so we are only 20 meters away from the space station, partially why we have a great view of Dragon as it is now holding there while the teams investigate.
In the meantime, you can see the views of the Dragon. They're going to start to get incrementally darker. We're entering into an orbital nighttime over the South Pacific Ocean now. Dragon and International Space Station, 264 statute miles over the South Pacific. We mentioned lighting was one of the things that we were watching. The Dragon does have the ability to dock during the night, So it doesn't have to completely wait for the sun to rise. It's really just the angle of the sun that's really the most important, to not interfere with some of the sensors, the guidance and navigation control equipment. But it does have the ability to dock during the nighttime, so it gives the teams plenty of time to assess. They don't have to rush for any reason. So we're just going to stand by and follow along with some of the troubleshooting steps to make sure that we are going to proceed past waypoint 2 in for a docking. Hook number 5 during ascent was the one, if you recall, that was the hook that was identified as part of the delay in the nose cone opening. It is a software that they're looking at right now. So it's just a reconfiguration. They were able to open up that nose cone, of course, and a very important milestone because it reveals those forward bulkhead Dracos that got us to where we are right now. So the teams will just continue to assess, make sure we're in a good config before giving the go to proceed.
Live view there of SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne, just right behind Gary and myself. Once again, we are holding at waypoint 2, about 20 meters away from the International Space Station. This will be the final hold prior to docking once that go is given. But at this point in time, as Gary said, the teams on the ground are doing a little investigation, some troubleshooting for that hook number 5. As we mentioned before, it's the hooks are what basically dock the capsule to the station, and there was an issue noted on it during the nose cone open yesterday. So the teams are troubleshooting it and working toward next steps to relay to the crew.
So we'll stand by for that. Should we proceed with a contact and capture, you're going to hear a series of call-outs as we make our way towards the International Docking Adapter. You heard this as part of the relay to the crew. Before we even got to waypoint 2, one of the commands was crew hands off point. You're going to hear that when the crew is just meters away from the International Docking Adapter. They're going to call out CHOP. That just means that the crew keep your hands off of the abort button, because the Dragon will do its job automatically, and that's built into the procedure, so you'll hear that call out CHOP should they proceed with contact today. Teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne are the ones looking at the Dragon.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop for vehicle status.
And SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Ground is still working on investigating a path forward. The docking system is configured as expected, but believe we will require a software override to continue with docking. Vehicle is healthy, no crew actions at this time. Over 2 hours of hold time margin at waypoint 2. Hop copy.
SpaceX Dragon copies all. We'll be waiting.
All right, so a quick recap.
Station Houston on the big loop.
Go ahead, Houston.
Hey, Josh, we expect you guys to be in Block Delta, Step 3 or 4 of your approach and retreat monitoring at this time.
And station copies.
A reminder, this is joint operations.
And Josh, on the big loop with you, just to clarify, 3 Delta or 4, but not the sub 4 within Delta.
Okay, we copy. Thanks, David. Yep, we're staring at step 4. Thank you.
So on the right, what you're hearing is the voice of David Brenna. He's the Capcom and the International Space Station flight control room on the right. On the left, the core, David Huang, talking with the crew aboard Dragon Endeavour. Everybody working together to monitor the approach. You heard the calls on the right, on the station side. Josh Cassada at what's called the Rendezvous Proximity Operations Panel. His job is to monitor the approach of Dragon Endeavour. In the meantime, the crew aboard Dragon is standing by for the flight controllers to reconfigure the software as they relayed up to the crew to make sure that those hooks are in a good configuration. Those hooks very important for securing Dragon to the International Space Station. You also heard the call that they have a 2-hour margin at waypoint 2. Don't expect to hang here for 2 hours, but it just indicates they're measuring the prop levels that are aboard the Draco engines. And it's not like they're going to run out of fuel at 2 hours. It just builds in the time that they have 2 hours to work the issue. And then if they do need to abort the docking today, they could make their way with plenty of prop to a 24-hour safe trajectory and reattempt. But that's all built into the procedures. So we have plenty of margin today for the teams to work this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, as we heard from SpaceX core David Huang, it's likely that they will have to force a software reboot, but the vehicle remains healthy and no crew action necessary at this time. So the crew inside Dragon Endeavour is basically just standing by, waiting for further actions to come once the troubleshooting has completed by the teams here on the ground.
Reminder of the journey of where we've been up to this point. We made our way from underneath the International Space Station out in front, and we're docking to the Zenith port today. This is the space-facing side. So you can see if you follow that line, we're at waypoint 2, holding 20 meters right in front of the Zenith docking port. So we're inside the keep-out sphere. The 20-meter hold point, again, is perfectly fine to hold at this point. We reviewed the 2-hour hold margin that's built into the procedures to allow us to work the software issue before proceeding for docking. The views will vary throughout our coverage as we continue to monitor this hold at 20 meters. The tracking and data relay satellites from aboard station providing views of Dragon holding. We'll be going through several different passes, so we'll be regaining those views shortly. We'll be monitoring lighting conditions.
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon ground for status.
Dragon's with you, go ahead.
Hey, just wanted to give you an update that we have a set of software commands that we are currently testing. We expect feedback soon, but also want to offer that if you prefer to open your visors, you are allowed to.
Okay, thanks. Copy. I've got a software fix in work in testing now, and we're going to open visors.
Good readback.
All right, for those just tuning into our coverage, Crew-6 and Dragon Endeavour are holding about 20 meters right in front of the docking port. As they made their way in, at the waypoint 2, there was a 30-second pause built into the procedure.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop for status.
We'll just hold for this call.
once again, for those that have recently joined, Crew-6 is holding 20 meters away from the International Space Station at waypoint 2. We are standing by for a call from the crew. As we indicated earlier, the teams here on the ground are troubleshooting an issue with hook number 5, which is part of the set of hooks utilized to make hard capture with the International Space Station for docking. It sounds like the crew was, it sounds like a manual software override was looking like the path forward, and no risk to vehicle health. Sounded like we were going to get something there, and everything, plenty of margin, 2 hours of margin is available if necessary, although not expected to utilize. So at this point in time, we're just standing by, waiting for some comms between core, SpaceX core crew operations and resources engineer, and just to communicate status back to the Crew-6 crew.
And a reminder that the crew are in a good position. Holding at waypoint 2 is built into the procedures. In fact, it is relaxed. They're able to open up their visors. They will close them again when the ground teams give them the go to proceed past waypoint 2 for docking. But in the meantime, they've pulled up their visors. They're relaxing. But that once they close their visors, that gives them an extra layer of protection, of pressurization, just in the unlikely event of a cabin depress. So that visor close will be an important step before they actually proceed. But right now, they're just again, as Kate mentioned, there's plenty of margin here to allow the teams to continue to work this.
As we mentioned before, they are holding at 20 meters, which I personally am not great at feeling out or really being able to tell what distance is. So I actually looked it up. It's about the distance between the pitcher's mound and home plate. So that's roughly how close they are to the International Space Station. So they're in good position. There's no rush. Like we said, we have 2 hours of margin in order to allow the teams on the ground to complete the troubleshooting for that hook, but we are standing by waiting for further instruction to the crew. We did hear that they were go for lifting their visors. They were asked to put their visors back down right before waypoint 1, I believe it was. And now that they are just holding at that 20-meter position, they're at waypoint 2. As the teams are working this issue, they were able to relax a little bit, continue to monitor the status on their crew displays, and lift their visors up.
Now, once they get aboard the International Space Station, Crew-5 has done a lot of preparation work to welcome them. In fact, once we'll continue our coverage after the Dragon docks to the space station, and we'll toss it over to Johnson Space Center to continue our coverage through the pressurization of the vestibule, hatch opening, and then we'll do a welcome ceremony with 11 crew members on board. But Crew-5 has done a lot of work this past week to make sure that the Crew-6, once they enter the station, can get pretty comfortable. There is going to be some time of shifting the schedules, so that will kind of make its way over the next couple of days. For instance, the International Space Station crew basically woke up and started their rendezvous monitoring procedures. So they have a full day of activity ahead of them. But after that welcome ceremony, the Crew-6 astronauts have had a long day so far, really preparing for docking. It is a long day of monitoring procedures, a lot of focus. So right after the welcome ceremony, they'll have a safety briefing, and then they'll be able to go to bed. Crew-5 have actually, so they've been staying in the crew quarters in Node 2 aboard the International Space Station. They've cleared out their sections, and so for Steve Bowen, Woody Hoberg, and for Sultan Al Niyati, they'll have their crew quarters already made up for them in Node 2, so they'll be able to go right into them. And then Andrei Fedyaev will head over to the Russian segment, where I'm sure his cosmonaut colleagues have prepared to make sure he will get plenty of rest as well. So all of that coming up soon as the teams continue to troubleshoot this issue at Waypoint 2.
Mm-hmm. As we've mentioned before, once you get on station, it is go, go, go. We've heard from pretty much every astronaut that has been on one of our launch or broadcasts. They've all said that once you get up there, it is really busy. Your days are full with conducting science, working out to make sure that you maintain muscle mass and bone density as much as possible, and obviously sleeping.
Yes.
And eating. And one of the things that I really enjoy watching whenever there's a new crew coming on board station are the shared meals. Just 10, 11, 12 people piled into that common area, sharing meals, and it's always fun to see how, different astronauts bring up different food items to share, ones that might be, more unique to the country that they're coming from or their culture. So that's a view, once again, using the thermal imager on board Dragon.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop for status.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
We have a software override to disable the faulty Hook 5 switch. We have verified through other telemetry that the hooks are all open and configured for docking. Software is testing this command and still needs a few minutes, as this is a gate to resuming. No crew actions at this time. How copy?
SpaceX Dragon copies, and thank you very much for the update.
Copy, Steve, and we'll let you know when we've confirmed that testing and configured Dragon, and then crew will be primed to resume.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We understand. Thank you.
That's great news. From here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, Corps David Wang has relayed to the crew. They believe they have a solution for that faulty hook. They're going to be testing that out, and then hopefully very soon we'll be hearing that go for docking. In the meantime, the crew appreciative of those words. They're continuing to stand by. Again, we have plenty of margin to hold here. So we're just wait for that command to confirm that the fix that they are relaying up to Dragon has taken. And then all teams will they'll communicate a go to proceed with docking. Again, Josh Cassada and Nicole Mann inside the International Space Station monitoring. Flight control teams in Houston and Hawthorne.
You can see there on the center screen the orientation of Dragon pointing towards the International Space Station. We now see a view from Dragon using the onboard thermal imager to basically keep eyes on the International Space Station. That light or white circle in the center there is exactly where we are heading. That's the zenith port. And you can actually see at the top of the screen, that is the Crew-5 capsule, Dragon Endurance, docked at the other dock, the forward port. So, so in that center screen, that bar at the bottom of the center screen is the International Space Station, and we can see Dragon's kind of pointing toward it. You can also see the crew rotating between available views and GUIs, or the information that they have available to them. So depending on preference, they can select what they want to see.
Now the software override that they're sending up to Dragon, commanding up to Dragon, that's going to take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, we do have plenty of margin. In fact, flight controllers are continuing to assess that margin, and there's even more than they originally predicted. So there is plenty of time to work this, and you can see the crew just standing by. There's no commands that need to be issued from inside Dragon, all of the commands being done from here on the ground.
I think the crew might be using one of the tablets that they take with them to take some pictures. It looks like they're perhaps trying to see if they can see the ISS through the small window located on that forward hatch.
That's right. They have the displays right in front of them, so they can't bring it right up there. They have to sort of angle it near their knees.
Yep.
It looks like they got a couple of good ones, though.
And unfortunately, because they have to remain, in their seats and buckled in, they are unable to, really be able to get up close to the windows to look out either.
It's been more than 24 hours up to this point. And of course, they haven't had to remain in those seats for that full 24 hours. Shortly after Dragon separated from the Falcon 9 and they had good Dragon Draco engine checkouts, they were able to doff their suits and essentially move freely about the cabin for much of their rendezvous time, so much of the 24 hours.
Yeah, I believe it was actually just as we were coming on air about 2 hours ago. The crew were just donning or putting their suits back on. So yeah, you're exactly right. They spent the majority of that time in not their spacesuits.
And again, we'll be continuing our coverage after a successful hard dock to the International Space Station. We'll hand it over to the Johnson Space Center to continue coverage through the pressurization of the vestibule, hatch opening, and the welcome ceremony. You'll hear calls, of course, once they have a successful hard mate to the International Space Station, they'll be able to get out of their suits again. You'll hear calls that they'll be able to doff their suits and hang them out to dry. You could follow along with our coverage as we'll be continuing throughout those next set of procedures. In the meantime, though, we're still looking good, hanging at 20 meters in front of the docking axis, that bright white circle you see at the center of your screen. From the cameras aboard the Dragon. We're over the United States right now, over the East Coast at 259 statute miles on our northeastern track, following a similar trajectory that the Falcon 9 took the Dragon up the the eastern seaboard, along the east coast of Canada, Newfoundland. We'll even get close to, on this pass over the Earth with the International Space Station and Dragon, we'll even get close to Shannon, Ireland. If you recall, during ascent, the call out Shannon indicated was called out to the crew. It just indicates that in an abort scenario, that's where they would be. That's where recovery assets would deploy.
For those of you that have just recently joined, Crew-6 Dragon Endeavour is holding at waypoint 2, about 20 meters away from the International Space Station. As we can see there, thanks to thermal cameras on board Dragon, that is the International Space Station, and we are heading toward that white circle right in the very middle. That is the Zenith port. That's where Crew-6 will be docking just minutes away. At this point in time, we have all 12 docking hooks open in preparation for docking. The teams here on the ground at SpaceX Mission Control are basically testing a software override as there is a faulty Hook 5 sensor. But the vehicle is healthy. The crew also remains healthy, pretty comfortable, as you can see in their seats. No action required for them at this time. And as Gary mentioned before, when this initially arose about 5 to 10 minutes ago, we heard on the loops that there's 2 hours of margin within the schedule. Basically, Dragon can hold this position for the next 2 hours and still have that re-rendezvous capability if necessary. but it sounds like that manual software override was likely to be a successful solution. So we're just waiting on words from SpaceX core David Huang to indicate if the teams have confirmed, and we'll be pushing that manual override to the crew.
And a reminder that we are in joint operations too. A lot of the work being done here in Hawthorne.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop for status.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Hey, Steve, just wanted to give you another update. We're still working through software testing and ensuring thorough verification. Expect more answers in approximately 10 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon copy. We'll be standing here.
So a reminder, it's no actions on the crew side. You see they're just continuing to monitor all the systems on their end. Core David Wang here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, confirming they need another 10 minutes or so, so Pacific time. We're looking at a little past 10:20. If you're following along in Central Time, it's a little past midnight, 12:20 a.m. Central Time. And that's just a status indicator for the teams as they continue to work this software override commanded from the ground up to the Dragon. A reminder, we'll continue to stress that there's plenty of margin to hold here. Teams are continuing to look at their propellant that keeps Dragon stabilized in its current position. So it's not necessarily just holding without firing. There are thruster firings that have to happen in order to keep it at the position where it is. Last status update we got from the teams here in Hawthorne was it was trending in a better direction than originally anticipated, meaning that we might actually exceed the 2-hour margin that was originally relayed to the crew. So we can use that if necessary. They'll continue to monitor, though, throughout the hold. They'll continue to get estimates on the propellant that's used as the teams assess that software issue. Again, we're expecting now less than 10 minutes until a new status is relayed to the crew.
So as Gary said, we are holding at waypoint 2, about 20 meters away from the International Space Station. We're expecting more information in about 10 minutes as the teams on the ground here basically provide thorough verification that that software override will fix that faulty Hook 5 sensor. There on the left-hand side of your screen is Commander Steve Bowen. I'd like to take a minute to share a little bit more information about his background. He was born in Cohasset, Massachusetts, and holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy and a master's in ocean engineering from the Joint Program in Applied Ocean Science and Engineering at MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. In July 2000, Bowen became the first submarine officer selected as an astronaut by NASA. This will be Bowen's 4th trip into space as a veteran of 3 space shuttle missions, STS-126 back in 2008, STS-132 in 2010, and STS-133 in 2011. Bowen has logged more than 140 days in space, including 47 hours, 18 minutes during 7 spacewalks. As a mission commander, as the Crew-6 mission commander, he will be responsible for all phases of flight on board Dragon, from launch all the way through re-entry.
Next, we have the pilot, Woody Hoberg. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, earned a bachelor's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, and a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. He's also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. The mission will be Hoberg's first flight since his selection as an astronaut in 2017, and as pilot, he'll be responsible for spacecraft systems and performance aboard Dragon.
Sultan Al Nayati will be making his first trip to space, representing the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates. He will be the first UAE astronaut to fly on board a commercial spacecraft. Onboard Dragon Al-Nayati will serve as a mission specialist, working to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He spent time in the UAE military prior to becoming one of the first 2 individuals selected by his country when they started their space program just a few years ago.
And last but not least, Andrei Fedyaev will be making his first trip into space. He also serves as a mission specialist working to monitor the spacecraft through the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He was selected as a cosmonaut in 2012 and is now the second cosmonaut to fly aboard the SpaceX Dragon. Again, these roles are when they are inside Dragon, but once we dock to the International Space Station, they'll become members of Expedition 68.
As I mentioned before, one of the things I really look forward to seeing once there's a new crew on board is really just seeing everybody come together and share food at meal times. And given the diversity within this crew and the crew members that are already on station, I think there will be some really great meals and stories, really great meals and stories to be shared.
That's right. Once we have the Crew-6 astronauts enter the International Space Station, we'll bring the population of station up to 11 crew members. That'll only be for a short time, though. We're looking at approximately a 5-day handover to allow everybody to get into their respective roles and responsibilities. Crew 5 will be handing over a lot of their responsibilities over to Crew 6. This direct handover allows the Crew 5 astronauts to brief Crew 6 on life aboard the International Space Station, get them familiarized with a lot of the systems on board. Of course, they've been training for months, sometimes years, on a lot of the systems aboard the International Space Station, but nothing like the real thing. So they'll give them a brief of life aboard, make sure they're good to go, and then Crew 5 aboard Dragon Endurance will enter their spacecraft and splash down off the coast of Florida.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that they were doing this exact same thing just 6 months ago.
Right.
And as we heard Josh Cassada mention earlier, he's excited for the Crew 6 team to arrive, but also because it means that they get to go home and see their families soon. So it's been a lot of time conducting experiments. That's one of the biggest things that astronauts do on board the International Space Station. Of course, eating and sleeping and working out to maintain physical health while in that microgravity environment is important. But one common theme that we hear from crew members that return to Earth is just that it's a very busy schedule whenever you are on station. It's exactly that. It is a schedule. As you mentioned before, Gary, the various shift planning, especially whenever there's a new crew coming up to the space station, it's a lot of coordination.
A good reminder that it is a truly busy time. Even now, we're about to see 2 Dragons docked to the International Space Station. Definitely not the first time we've seen that. We've had a lot of these handovers between crews aboard Dragon.
You can actually see that Crew 5 capsule there at the top of that thermal image that was on the right-hand side of your screen. So that's a view of the Crew 6 capsule holding there at waypoint 2, that 20-meter mark from the International Space Station. But yeah, that thermal view that we keep getting coming from that capsule, from those sensors there at the exposed region underneath the nose cone, that forward hatch section, the forward bulkhead section where that forward hatch is located. We keep seeing that view of the International Space Station of those thermal imagers, and I just think it's so cool that there's another Dragon capsule there at the top of that thermal image that hopefully we'll be able to catch views of momentarily.
In the meantime, we got these great views of Dragon. You can sort of see those thruster firings, keeping Dragon in place. Again, the teams here in Mission Control and Hawthorne are tracking good propellant, so we can hold here for quite some time. The sun is starting to rise as we enter into an orbital sunrise. The space station is 261 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean, about to cross over Western Europe. But again, we're holding until they actually dock and are welcomed by that crew, Expedition 68, that I was talking about. It's going to be quite busy aboard the station for a little bit, for ideally less than a week. Here's Expedition 68 right now, a multinational crew. They're all aboard the International Space Station. From the left, we have Frank Rubio. And if we head our way right, next is Russian cosmonaut Dmitry Vitelin. Then JAXA astronaut from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, Koichi Wakata. In the center are the two NASA astronauts that are monitoring the approach and docking of Crew-6. First is Josh Cassada, and then Nicole Mann. That goes by the call sign Duke. If you hear Duke on the space to grounds, it's referring to Nicole Mann. The commander of the International Space Station right now is Sergei Prokopyev. And then on the far right is one of the Crew-5 crew members, Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina. So 7 crew members aboard Expedition 68 aboard the International Space Station. We'll bring that population up to 11 with Crew-6's arrival.
Sounds pretty cozy.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I want to point out, while this view is gorgeous, it is incredibly deceiving. It looks like Dragon is just floating quite still, which couldn't be further from the truth. Both the space station and the Dragon capsule are going about 17,500 miles per hour, orbiting planet Earth.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop for status.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
We have approximately 94 minutes of hold time at waypoint 2, limited by prop. Software testing is continuing, and teams are working to get this right, not just fast. We'll come back with more updates.
SpaceX Dragon, we're standing by.
So as we heard there from SpaceX core David Huang, indicating that the software teams still working on that software, on that solution, likely a software override. They're providing thorough verification that will solve that faulty sensor on hook 5. Of course, those hooks are what are required to enable that hard capture to the International Space Station. But what he said there was incredibly important. They're working to get it right, not just fast. That's exactly right. Obviously, crew safety is of utmost importance, both for the crew on board, on board Dragon Endeavour, but also the crew that is on board the station that you so perfectly went through with remembering every single name in that order. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. The teams are working to get it right, not just fast. He also indicated that we have 94 minutes of margin remaining, so plenty of time to work through this. That 94 minutes is basically the amount of time that the Crew-6 the Crew-6 crew has in this position, while still being able to basically maintain capability to perform a re-rendezvous.
That's plenty of margin, and again, the flight control teams are continuing to assess that. They continue to monitor the prop levels, and you can see, even on the right, the camera from the external side of the International Space Station, you can see those firings of the Draco engines, keeping the Dragon in place, holding at 20 meters. That's what we're monitoring, those prop levels. Now, again, a quick reminder, that doesn't mean that at the 94 minutes from now, we run out of prop.
Right.
It just means that for the hold position, we have about 94 minutes here. And then if we need to break out, there's plenty of prop to execute additional maneuvers. They really try to minimize the prop usage on a nominal trajectory up there just for moments like this. If you need to hold for 2 hours, you can hold for 2 hours. You have the prop in order to do that, and then reassess later with the prop you need to execute additional maneuvers. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And that's also partially why that launch time is down to the second. It's precise in order to rendezvous with the International Space Station. And just like you said, it's to that nominal ascent is the most efficient path, basically, to get to the International Space Station, so that there is leeway or flexibility for situations like this, where these hold points are built in and that margin is available if necessary. So once again, Dragon continuing to hold there at waypoint 2, 20 meters away from the zenith port of the International Space Station. Live views coming from inside Dragon Endeavour. They're on the left-hand side of your screen. We have Commander Steve Bowen on that seat to the left, and to his right is Woody Hoberg, who is the pilot. It seems like they have their arms up, but they are in microgravity, so their hands are actually just floating there. It's a pretty comfortable position. That view on the left-hand side of your screen is coming from the Dragon capsule that is on the right-hand side of your screen. It's a thermal image of that zenith port, which is the intended destination. In this view, we should be able to see some of that, some of the firings of the Draco thrusters as Dragon maintains its position there at waypoint 2. As I mentioned before, this view is a little deceiving because we can't see, planet Earth for that frame of reference. So it looks like everything is just at a standstill, but of course it's orbiting Earth, meaning it's going incredibly fast. But still in position, or it looks like it's still with relative position to the ISS.
Right. It kind of looks black too. Of course, there are plenty of stars in the sky, but a lot of what's being played with the camera on the outside of the station is exposure. The sun is illuminating the side of the capsule, so we're not able to make out a lot of the stars. There's also atmosphere that affects that. So that's why you see that blackness. But there's going to be a lot of sunlight from where we are now. The station is 261 statute miles over the Mediterranean Sea. It just passed the southern coast of Italy on a southeastern track. And it's morning over in Europe, so it's going to make its way southeast. We're going to be passing over Egypt soon and make our way down. And we'll be in this sunlight position for a while. And a reminder that this is joint operations between the teams here in Hawthorne and, of course, the teams over in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas. Everybody's got to give their go before proceeding with docking today. But once we hear that, we'll start to see motion. The Dragon will make its way from this view down. It'll make its way towards the Earth.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop for status.
And SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
We have a software override command that will allow Dragon to continue to docking. Again, teams have verified that Dragon is in the correct docking configuration. Ground will be sending the override command. Ground will then pull for another go, and then brief crew when ready to resume. How copy?
SpaceX Dragon on the big loop, you were cut off.
Copy, Dragon. I'll repeat. We have a software override command that will allow Dragon to continue to docking. Again, teams have verified that Dragon is in the correct docking configuration. Ground will be sending the override command, and then pull for another go, and then brief crew when ready to resume. How copy?
SpaceX Dragon, copy, all understand, and we'll be ready for the pull and our actions.
All right, good news there coming from SpaceX core David Huang, letting the Crew-6 know, letting the Crew-6 crew, letting them know that the teams have worked through that override.
Station Houston on the big loop for comm.
Go ahead on 2, David.
Hey, Josh, just for your SA, you may have noticed in voice to us that we don't have space ground 3 and 4. That's because we've gone to our KU mask. We'll regain that at 0651, just for your SA. We don't need it for docking.
Okay, appreciate the heads up. 0651 to get KU back.
As we were saying before, we just got confirmation that the teams here on the ground will be pushing that software override through up to Dragon Endeavour, and that there will be another poll for go for docking, and the crew will then receive final instruction, basically that final go. So that if that override is being pushed through currently, that should take hopefully just a couple of minutes. As we said before, we had 2 hours of margin to hold here at waypoint 2, 20 meters away from the International Space Station. So we're still well within that margin. And as the SpaceX core indicated, that the teams were looking to get it done right, not fast. And so we're pleased to hear that the solution has been identified and is being pushed up to the capsule.
And that call you heard from Mission Control in Houston up to Josh Cassada is confirming that the KU link is currently masked until 12:51 a.m. Central Time, 10:51 p.m. Pacific Time. So right now the teams on both sides are polling.
Houston on 2 for Frank and exercise. Due to the exercise constraints with the hold we're in, we're going to defer your 0T2 ops and your ARED that are hard scheduled for today.
Copy on 2, thank you.
That was Frank Rubio aboard the space station confirming. Unfortunately, he's going to have to delay his exercise for the day. The T2 being the stationary bicycle, ARED being the sort of a weightlifting machine that's configured for microgravity, so it uses hydraulics. But they want to minimize loads, impacts, vibrations on the International Space Station for docking operations, so they're going to hold on that for a little bit. I was mentioning the KU mask. That's going to be in effect until 10:51 p.m. Pacific, 12:51 a.m. Central, which means as the teams are polling, you can see the flight control teams here in Hawthorne. They're also polling with the International Space Station flight control teams to proceed past waypoint 2 in for a docking. If we do that very shortly, we may not get KU, which means we may not get views. It depends on if we get pass over a ground station or not. We may get views from the Dragon. Not a requirement to press in for docking. There's a lot of other factors that are more important than getting those views. So we'll see. We'll stand by for those teams to continue their poll.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop for approach 2.
SpaceX Dragon, ready to copy.
Ground has pulled go for approach 2. Confirm crew readiness for final approach and that visors are down. As a reminder that once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted. How copy?
SpaceX Dragon copies all. Our visors are down and the crew is ready to resume.
Copy, Steve. Dragon is go to command resume.
All right, so great news there coming from SpaceX Core indicating that poll for docking was conducted.
SpaceX Dragon, we have resumed.
The poll for docking was conducted once again.
Dragon is in approach 2 prep.
Go for docking, and we're now in prep for to approach the International Space Station.
It's a 30-second pause before the Draco engines start firing to get us closer to the International Space Station. So we'll hear another call once Dragon is in motion. Now again,
Dragon is in approach 2 and continuing to station.
Here we go.
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is resuming approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 and 1.102. Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
mission copies. We are in steps 5 and 6.
Now, if we can bring you views from inside the capsule, again, we will try. Unfortunately, we don't have any live views at the moment. However, those crew displays that the crew has available to monitor progress, they actually will have a live camera basically showing how close they are to that, the zenith port. And they are able to monitor the progress again, being able to see which Draco thrusters are firing when. But we're looking forward to seeing the crew continue on this docking journey.
Now, even though we don't have views, we are getting telemetry, so we're coming up on, we are making some motion. It's just a little bit, we did increase a little bit of distance while we were at the hold point, so we got out to about 25 meters, so now we're making our way in. We're at about 20 meters now. We'll stand by for contact and capture. You heard that reiteration from the ground of that crew hands-off point. That will be called up to the crew. It's called CHOP. They make an acronym for it. So you'll know that the crew cannot issue an abort command at that point. But right now we're looking good. 18 meters in closing.
Live view there of SpaceX Mission Control. That is where we've been hearing those core updates come from. But at this point in time, Dragon is back to closing that distance, as Gary said, closing that distance for docking. There will be a soft capture first, then followed by hard capture. We saw that soft capture ring in earlier views of the Dragon capsule. So that soft capture ring will
10
be...
meters.
Copy, 10 meters.
Call from inside Dragon Endeavour, 10 meters in closing. We'll get those calls from the crew, including CHOP, and then confirmation of contact and capture. Visuals are not a requirement to proceed with docking, so even though we don't have KO, even though we don't have videos, we do have plenty of telemetry coming down to give us the confidence we need. And of course, we have the crew aboard Dragon Endeavour and International Space Station that are witnessing the action now.
Once again, Dragon is making its way, closing the final meters between itself and the International Space Station, specifically the Zenith port.
SpaceX Dragon 5 meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
Only 5 meters to go.
It's a slow and methodical approach. Progress seems to be good for the crew aboard Dragon. Of course, Josh Cassada and Nicole Mann are inside the International Space Station monitoring. There are safeguards in place if needed, but right now we're looking pretty good.
Once again, we'll bring those live views whenever we have them. Unfortunately, they're not available at this moment in time, but those visuals are not required.
SpaceX Dragon 2 meters.
Copy, 2 meters.
The crew is monitoring, as you can tell from those callouts from inside Dragon Endeavour. Those
1 meter.
last meter to go.
Copy, 1 meter. Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, soft capture confirmed.
SpaceX Dragon copies. Thank you.
That soft capture occurring at 10:40 p.m. Pacific time, 12:40 a.m. Central time. International Space Station and Dragon were 261 statute miles off the coast of Somalia in Eastern Africa.
It's great news there. Now, of course, as we were saying before, everything is scheduled. It's step by step, and there are still a few steps to complete before Dragon.
Soft capture ring retraction in progress.
Still a few steps to go before Dragon is securely attached to the station. So there we just heard the call out that soft capture ring retraction was in progress.
That soft capture ring is pulling the Dragon Endeavour in closer for the next series of steps, which will be closing those hooks. There are 12 hooks, and they'll close 6 at a time. And once all 12 hooks are engaged, that confirms a hard capture. In the meantime, on the International Space Station side, they're working an intricate series of attitude control maneuvers to allow minimal loads during this ring retraction process, using gyros and other thrusters, mostly disabled at this point.
In the next couple minutes, we'll hear updates regarding the hard capture sequence. We should hear a call out in the next minute or two indicating that the hard capture sequence has begun. That will take about 4 minutes, and at that point in time, we will have a complete hard dock, at which docking will basically be complete at that point in time. Of course, more time before the side hatch is opened and the crews get to greet each other on board station. But as of right now, we have had confirmation that the soft capture ring retraction is complete. That's the part that, as Gary just said, pulls the Dragon capsule in toward the International Space Station. And then next up, we will have that hard capture sequence start.
Flight controllers are monitoring the soft capture ring retraction, and everything's looking good so far. They mentioned the soft capture ring. The Dragon is inside the vestibule, so that's important. It's pulling it in, lining up those hooks to begin that hard capture sequence that you were mentioning. Again, visuals are not a requirement for this process. We're getting plenty of telemetry and confidence from the teams on the ground. Things are proceeding nominally. Of course, those readouts from the crew aboard Dragon and the International Space Station monitoring as well. Everything's looking good.
If you've recently joined, Dragon had a pretty smooth journey to the International Space Station. They launched from Kennedy Space Center.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
SpaceX Dragon conference.
Flight control teams monitoring a good ring retraction. Right now they're pausing to allow International Space Station attitude to configure. I mentioned a series of intricate maneuvers to make sure to minimize the loads on the Dragon through the docking process. Once those hooks are engaged, they can go back to a nominal configuration. But in the meantime, there's this pause. Of course, we'll be standing by for that hard capture sequence. We did upload that software override for the hooks. That'll be an important milestone to make sure that those hooks engage for a hard capture, so we'll stand by and wait for that. But again, we did have a soft capture confirmed at 10:40 p.m. Pacific time, 12:40 a.m. Central time. And again, the ISS and the Dragon were off the coast of Somalia in Eastern Africa at the time of docking.
As I was saying earlier, the crew had a pretty smooth ride up to the International Space Station, lifting off just roughly over 24 hours ago from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And yeah, pretty smooth ascent phase. We did have that issue with Hook 5.
Dragon Station, this is Houston on the Big Loop. MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
SpaceX Dragon time?
Yeah, so the hook driving is now about to begin. As I was saying, there was a software override that was sent up to the Dragon capsule from the teams on the ground in order to resolve the faulty sensor on hook 5. That hook 5 being one of the hooks that is now being used to drive that hard capture. All in all, aside from that minor issue that the teams were able to resolve in a few minutes, a pretty smooth ride to space. I'm sure they're excited to eventually open the door and see their friends.
The hooks are deployed. There are 12 total hooks to help us have a hard capture, and they're in 2 sets of 6 called gangs. The first gang of 6, we're hearing good calls from the flight control teams. They are driving as expected.
Once again, Dragon Endeavour now underway with the hard capture, the driving of those 12 hooks, as Gary just mentioned, operating in 2 sets of 6. The first set sounds like everything is going well. The second set to follow. And once hard capture is complete, that basically means that Dragon will have docked. Now, this is Dragon has driven itself autonomously to the space station. So at this point in time, the crew continues to monitor the progress as those hooks drive. And they are following along with their crew displays and, of course, listening in to information being provided from the teams here at SpaceX Mission Control, which you see there on your screen, as well as from the mission control teams at Johnson Space Center over in Houston, Texas.
Now, of course, we were holding at that 20-meter marker for some time. So if you're following along, we're going to continue our coverage to make sure that the hooks drive.
Station on the big loop we see is complete with 1.102, and we've got about 45 minutes to get this place straightened up.
Josh, we copy and concur. Sounds good.
All right, and from the ground teams, we heard the first gang of 6 hooks have driven, and they look like they're in a good configuration. The second set of hooks, another 6, are currently driving. We'll continue to monitor the progress of those. Again, once these hooks are driven, that is that hard dock to the International Space Station. It kicks off another series of steps. They'll be able to doff or take off their suits once the Dragon is fully engaged to the International Space Station for that hard dock, and they'll go through a series of steps to get those hatches open, and that'll take some time. Again, we were holding at that 20-meter hold point for quite some time, so if you're following along with our coverage and want to continue with our coverage, we'll hand it over to the Johnson Space Center to take us through hatch opening and the welcome ceremony. Everything is shifting slightly to the right. If you're following in Central Time, we're looking at hatches open approximately 2:18, and then a welcome ceremony around 3 a.m. Central Time. Of course, those are approximate. They'll have to go through the procedures, and we'll monitor KU, but just to give our viewers a good indication of what we're looking at so far, for those who want to stick around and see the astronauts of Expedition 68 welcome Crew-6, who are also joining Expedition 68.
That's right. So as we said, the second set of hooks is currently driving. The first set got good readout there, and sounds like that first set of 6 is complete. The second set of 6 now underway. And as Gary mentioned, still a number of steps to go through prior to egressing Dragon capsule and greeting their friends on board the International Space Station, such as being able to doff their suits. They'll be able to take their suits off and store them.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, docking sequence complete. or hard capture complete. Correction.
SpaceX Dragon copy, hard capture complete.
Beautiful view there from the cameras on board the International Space Station. That is the Crew-6 capsule, as it has just completed the hard capture. Docking sequence not quite yet complete, but hard capture is complete. That is the zenith port of the ISS.
That's a great indication of the hooks, too. All 12 hooks are engaged in place, looking good. Next series of steps, that soft capture ring that was used in the first leg of the docking sequence is going to retract. There's also an umbilical that is deployed from the Dragon and connects the Dragon to the International Space Station. Dragon at this point has been relying on its batteries and the solar arrays that you can see. That black portion of the unpressurized trunk, that from this view is sort of at the top of where the Dragon is. It's been relying on battery power, but once it's hooked up, it'll draw some power from the International Space Station, which of course has solar arrays to provide plenty of power through once they configure the Dragon for the quiescent stage, where it will remain for approximately 6 months while the Crew-6 astronauts become expedition members and conduct science, maintenance, and upgrades for the next 6 months in 2023.
So at this point in time, we're just waiting to hear the confirmation that the docking sequence is completed. We're expecting the core to give a call to the crew to indicate that they can doff their spacesuits and just to let them know that that entire docking sequence is complete. We did get confirmation that the hard capture portion was complete. So awaiting that awaiting that call from SpaceX core. Once again, that is the Crew-6 capsule that just completed that hard capture with those 12 hooks.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Docking sequence complete. Crew Dragon Endeavour, Steve, Woody, Sultan, Andre. After a brief scenic detour, welcome to the International Space Station.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We're happy to be here.
On behalf of SpaceX, it has been a pleasure working with you. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connection shortly. You are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012 and will bring cameras external.
SpaceX Dragon copies, and we'll be picking up 4012. Thanks very much for getting us here.
All right, great news there from SpaceX core indicating that Dragon has completed its docking sequence. The spacecraft.
Dragon, this is Houston on the big loop. Sultan, Andre, Woody, and Steve. Ahlan wa sahlan, Dobry Pajalavat, and welcome to the International Space Station. From your training teams, your execution teams, and your friends and family, we're all so incredibly proud of you and are excited for your expedition. You guys really are living testimony that the ISS is a joint human effort, and your unique crew truly exemplifies that. Now let's work towards getting this hatch open so you can go hug your crewmates.
Houston Dragon copies all. Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to a very good increment.
So now that
Dragon on Dragon ground, no response required. Cameras are exterior.
Dragon Station, Expedition 68 welcomes you. We can't wait to get you aboard and inside the International Space Station.
All right, now that Dragon has completed...
Station Dragon copies are waiting on you, Josh.
Now that
Yeah, I'm checking Optimus. I show you guys 3 days late.
Now that Dragon has completed the docking sequence, spacecraft must undergo a handful of checks before we will be able to open that hatch. The crew on board Dragon will now get a chance to get out of their suits before moving into those hatch operations.
That's right, and things will be picking up inside the station too as NASA's Josh Cassada gets the hatch on the station side ready to be opened, and then they start pressurizing that area known as the vestibule between the Dragon and the station hatches. So with Dragon fully docked, that's going to do it for us here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew-6 won't stop here.
We're going to toss it over to Rob at Mission Control Houston to take us through the vestibule depressurization and hatch opening, and when we'll see NASA astronaut Stephen Bowen, Woody Hoburg, along with United Arab Emirates astronaut Sultan Al-Nayati and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrei Fedyaev float into the International Space Station. But first, quick recap of how they got here. It started several hours ago, more than I guess would be about 28 hours ago. They suited up in the ONC building at Kennedy Space Center. They rode out to pad 39A. They had a successful ingress. Of course, the liftoff from Kennedy Space Center, pad 39A at 12:34 a.m. Eastern Time. Today, technically, I had to check the clock, or excuse me, 12:34 a.m. Eastern Time. And we had successful stage 1 landing, of course, Dragon separation, nose cone deploy. We saw that nose cone open as Dragon was approaching the International Space Station. Of course, those 5 major burns that the capsule completed to get closer to the International Space Station. And then we just had docking a couple minutes ago on today, Friday, March 3rd.
And again, that docking time was 10:40 p.m. Pacific time, 12:40 a.m. Eastern time, or Central time rather, on the 3rd. So if you're tracking in Eastern time, that's 1:40 a.m. And now that Crew-6 has arrived, we're looking ahead to the return of Crew-5. We'll be taking you along as Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, Koichi Wakata, and Anna Kikina return home after their long-duration stay aboard the station. Teams are assessing return dates, which will be announced on nasa.gov, so be sure to tune in as NASA and SpaceX bring you live coverage every step of their journey. Be sure to follow SpaceX and NASA on social media for real-time updates. So thanks again for watching. Go NASA, go SpaceX, and go Crew-6, and of course Crew-5 too. We'll now hand it over to Rob at the Johnson Space Center in Houston to continue sharing the mission as the crew prepares to board their home for the next 6 months, the International Space Station. For those of you watching on the SpaceX YouTube channel, please head over to NASA TV to follow the coverage live.